So this is the definition of a woman who's changing the world, but now on a global scale. And so can you give a massive round of applause to, I just blasted up my nose. A round of applause to Jude Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Ali, for inviting me. And thank you, Ali, for being a startup, a solo startup, because when Claire was talking earlier about creativity and the fact that we all know what creativity is, sort of, I'm not sure that you can justify creativity as a real power for change unless it's attached to the idea of courage. Because when you have ideas and you think, oh, I've got a kind of hunch about something, if it feels like it's going to sit inside something that is easily recognizable and everybody's kind of okay with that, then I'm not sure how creative that is. I think the ingredient that's needed when I say courage is the sense that you're going to project an idea into a space, into the future, that will cause ripples, where people will rethink. Because creativity is actually creating a kind of window where you're looking out and you're seeing a different view that you hadn't expected to see. And I don't think that women traditionally have been groomed to be courageous. We've been groomed the opposite. And I'm going to use that word very explicitly because we can't get away from how internalized shame becomes when you're told that periods, menopause, cancer, body parts, sexuality, disability, race, class are all things you should sort of cover up. And you can't get away from the idea that King Lear's favourite daughter, Cordelia, was his favourites because she didn't say anything. He said it's an excellent thing in a woman, just not to really say anything. Which is why he's so shocked when she actually disagrees with him finally. And so generation after generation after generation of women, and still in many parts of the world, being groomed to be passive, to be docile, to fit in, to negotiate, to compromise, to collude. It's hard, therefore, to have courage to make change happen. Which is why it's so extraordinary that actually, despite that fact, despite the sort of theology that women are there to support men, women actually very often, over and over again, say that is neither real, practical, or advisable if we want a better world. So I'm not going to do that. Which is why often when women are courageous, instead of that word being applied to them, there are other words applied. Words that have more hostility attached in those adjectives. And I think it's been difficult for women to constantly be soloists as courageous and articulate people. And because the other thing that we've been groomed not to do is to be collaborative, although we naturally are. And we haven't been really encouraged to be a collective as women. And when those collective moments have happened, whether they be first wave feminism, second wave feminism, Black Lives Matter, Say Her Name, all of those things, when women do come together and say, I insist that you hear us, not just me, then very often those whole movements have been very, very severely denigrated because, I suppose, there is a fear of the other. If you have a distortion of power, which is what we're talking about, because this is not about men, this is about power. If you have distorted power so that one group have a lot of power and another group can never have as much power, then the natural corruption that produces means that every time the power balance tries to change, the people with the power kind of go, hold on a minute, let's find reasons to put it back in its box. And those reasons become stories. Stories why women can't cope with power, shouldn't have power, don't know how to use power, etc., etc., etc. Now, Claire wants optimism, and so do I. And I think we have every reason to be optimistic, and that is also to do with story as well. So if you take something which many First Nation women talk about, which is our ancestors, I can't tell around this room how many of you are from aristocratic blood. Hands up, who's an aristocrat? Okay, so the rest of us, therefore, are probably peasants. You know, if you do, like, who do you think you are? If you go back, there's a very funny sketch, actually, about somebody sort of hoping at some stage they'll find some blue blood and just endlessly being told, no, that was a peasant and that was a peasant. All their previous lives, incarnations, all peasants, peasants, peasants. So my grandmother had 14 children, and she left school when she was 12. And my mother had 4 daughters, left school when she was 15. Here I am, I'm the artistic director of the South Bank Centre for another 2 weeks. And I've been able to realise so many of my dreams as a Liverpudlian girl. And that is because people I'll never know, not only women, but largely women, had the courage to be difficult enough to fight for girls' education, to fight for the right to use your body in whatever way you want, fought for the right to be able to be in the arts without being called a prostitute, fought for the right for a girl to allow to have creativity and dreams and make them happen. So we, I think, have the optimism that goes with having ancestry. You're not peasants. You're not living under the feudal system, although some of you may feel that in your workplaces, I don't know. But, you know, the divine right of kings stopped. Patriarchy can come to an end. And there are many men who will be pleased when that happens for their sake. It's not a good thing to have huge distortion of power. So the story of the human race actually is one where great changes of frameworks can really happen. And it's also a story where most of us individually can look at our previous ancestors and go, actually, life is better for us. So the big issue is, do we have the courage as girls and women, and the boys and men who are in the audience, well, not many boys, but anyway, men, to say that the excitement of gender equality is not just about human rights, but it's also about what we keep saying about diversity. The excitement of the world, if we had a different shared sense of how stories get made, the excitement of that world would be incredible. I mean, we all know what it's like to be in a smallish team of different kinds of people, which to begin with often alarms you because, you know, our safety net tells us to zone into our own tribe. But when you don't do that, when you have the courage to be with people who are not like you, so here am I'm a white, cisgendered girl, now an older woman, I've had menopause, I've had children, I've had loads of the things I'm ashamed of, or told to be ashamed of in my time. But here I am, but I don't want to be in a team just full of me's. You want to be in a team full of other people who have different life experiences. And although that can be frightening to begin with, when it starts happening, it's amazing. So you can imagine exponentially, if that was what the world looked like, of course the world would be so much better, so much more advanced, so much more progressive, so much more effective. Because what a pity if my dreams had been squashed. What a loss to the world. And actually, I'm sort of being serious because, in a sense, this is also about personal choices of you all in the audience. You know, what about your story? I mean, I think it was Mary Wells, wasn't it, who won Advertising Woman of the Year in 1971, did the whole British Airways rebrand. I mean, there have been brilliant women in advertising sequentially, and there always will be some, because you can't keep women down. But it's whether or not there can be en masse change. And that isn't really about you thinking of yourself just as an industry. It's about you thinking of yourself as a person, an individual person, and thinking, what is my story? And often the best part of your story is the things that you've been told are a deficit. Some of the most amazing pieces of creative activism have come from women who've had to deal with severe trauma. And on the flip side of that, when time has allowed them, they have built campaigns beyond belief. I mean, we've all seen that happen. So you will have things that you think you ought to be sort of hiding in your story or playing down in your story. I would advise the opposite. I would say, no, that is the thing you need to build on. And don't think of it as something where it's because you're a professional. No, it's because you've got a life. You know, we're not talking about your story being your CV and separately your life. It's talking about you as humans owning your entire life. And that means that we as women have got to take on, of course, campaigns about childlessness, of course, campaigns about sexual choice, of course, campaigns about racism. We have got to take on those campaigns as women so that we can be together talking about what change looks like.